Move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable the Shadow Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer confirm that Australia has been in a household recession for the past 6 quarters and that this is the longest straight run of falling per capita output on record?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. There he is. He's there after all. He is there after all, Mr Speaker, and what a relief for all of us that he is. Mr Speaker, as I said when the national accounts came out last Wednesday, the Australian economy barely grew in the June quarter. That's true in nominal terms, and it's true that the economy is weak per person as well. And that's why it would be absolutely diabolical if we pulled $315 billion out of the economy, as the Shadow Treasurer wants us to do. Now, Mr Speaker, if we had taken the free advice of those opposite, if we had taken their advice, the economy would be in recession right now. The economy would be in recession right now. When we came to office, inflation had a 6 in front of it and it was rising. Interest rates were already going up. There were deficits as far as the eye could see. Real wages were falling when we came to office, Mr Speaker. And because of our collective efforts, we've got wages moving again. We're rolling out cost of living relief. And if they truly cared, Mr Speaker, if they truly cared about household incomes in this country, they wouldn't have called for an election over our tax cuts for every taxpayer. If they really cared about household incomes, they wouldn't be against our cost of living relief. If they really cared about household incomes, they wouldn't be wanting Australians to work longer for less, Mr Speaker. Now, we take a different approach to those opposite, and it's clear in the response to the national accounts that came out last week. Those opposite were desperate for the economy to go into recession. They desperately want higher interest rates. They desperately want higher inflation. They desperately want the economy to go backwards because it serves their political purposes. And they hope, Mr Speaker, that if we go into recession, nobody will notice that we're in the 3rd year of a 3-year parliamentary term and they still don't have any credible or costed economic policies, Mr Speaker. And they still won't come clean to the Australian people what their $315 billion in cuts means for Medicare, what it means—
The Treasurer will pause. There's far too much noise during this first question and first answer. We're not starting the week that way. We'll have a lot more quiet as we move forward, but the Shadow Treasurer will raise his point of order.
It was a very specific question, relevance, Mr Speaker. We've seen a record 6 quarters of collapsing GDP per capita.
Yeah, the Leader of the House on the point of order.
The point of order went directly to household. The question went directly to households, which is what the Treasurer is answering.
Well, for there to be some compare and contrasting, there must, of course, at least outline what the government's policy is. So, for the remainder of the answer won't just be about the opposition, because he wasn't asked about opposition policy. He was asked about government policy. And he has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm talking about the madness of pulling out hundreds of billions of dollars out of an economy which is already weak, Mr Speaker, already weak in per capita terms and already weak in nominal terms, Mr Speaker. Now, what we've done, Mr Speaker, is we've managed this economy responsibly. We've maintained a primary focus on inflation, but not ignoring the risks to growth or the pressures that people are under. Now, per capita growth went backwards, Mr Speaker, on a number of instances under those opposite as well. We understand that the economy is particularly soft right now. It would be even softer if those opposite had their way. Their approach to cuts in the budget, Mr Speaker, would be a recipe for recession. We found a way to keep the economy growing at the same time as we provide cost of living relief and get the budget in much better.
The Leader of the Nationals and the member for Hume are interjecting far too much. That will cease immediately. The member for Solomon has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today, the report from the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide was handed down. Why was this Royal Commission so important?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Solomon for his question and for his strong advocacy of the need for a Royal Commission. And on behalf of the government, the parliament and indeed the people of Australia, I want to thank everyone who contributed to the Royal Commission into defence and veteran suicide. In particular, I want to acknowledge the Defence Force members, veterans and their families who've shared their experiences to shape the final report that will be tabled later today. For many, this has meant revisiting the darkest moments of their lives. 12 public hearings, 340 witnesses, 900 private sessions, more than 5,800 submissions were made to this Royal Commission. It is a measure of the extraordinary courage of those involved and a reflection of their great selflessness, their determination to make sure that others are protected from what they have endured. I do want to also, in addition to recognising the contribution of the member for Solomon, recognise particularly Senator Lambie for her steadfast efforts and other members of parliament across the parliament on both sides who have been passionate about this issue. I also want to recognise some of the families. I know Julianne Finney is in the gallery today. She did so much to bring this commission about. Mr Speaker, Royal Commissions hold a special status in our democracy. They have power to seek the truth about what has happened and in the past, but they also carry a weight and status to drive change into the future, to make our nation face up to our collective failures to not do better, but to demand that we do better in the future. And this is where the government will thoroughly consider every recommendation. We want to work across the parliament on these issues and do what we can to ensure that just as our veterans and defence personnel step up for our country, we have an obligation to step up for them. Speaker, I do want to say that this will be a difficult day for many people. It will be triggering. So I do want to encourage anyone who's in need of support today to contact either Lifeline on 131114 or Open Arms 1800 011 046. Lest we forget is Australia's most solemn promise. It's a promise we make to remember the fallen, to honour their sacrifice, to care for the loved ones who are left behind, and to ensure that all those who have worn the uniform of this nation have access to the support and services they need and deserve. This will be a difficult day for many Australians, but I pay tribute to all those who've endured a difficult day today in order to make tomorrow better for those veterans.
On indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, on indulgence, and I thank the Prime Minister for his update to the House, and on behalf of the Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Shadow Minister for Defence and all of my colleagues, we join with the government in what necessarily is a bipartisan response to one of the most critical issues facing our country. Every country, and particularly ours because of the values that we adhere to, should always treat with respect and dignity those who have served our country in uniform, people who have left their families, left their parents, left their loved ones to go and fight in another part of the world. When we remember back to those who came back from the Vietnam War, the shameful way in which our country treated those people on return had an enduring, scarring impact on them individually, but on their families and on subsequent generations. When we think about the way in which we have provided support most recently to those who have served in the Middle East, many particularly on successive rotations, being away from their loved ones, coming back from that high-impact service that they were performing in the Middle East, to expect them to lead a normal life, picking kids up from school or sport, all of that takes an enormous toll. And the fact is that over a long period of time, our country hasn't done well enough in providing support to those people. I thank the Prime Minister for his words today, and I thank all of those who have been involved in providing evidence to the Royal Commission. And as the Prime Minister says, this will be impactful again today for many. I was with the member for Herbert in Townsville only a week or so ago, speaking to some veterans up there about their own impact, the way in which the services still don't do justice to the support that's required to help them through their mental and physical ailments. And Defence has let people down. The Department of Veterans Affairs has let people down. Both sides of politics over a long period of time, despite the best of intent, have let these diggers down as well. And so in providing support to those who have given evidence and those families who remain, we pay tribute to all of them. I thank the families that I've met with over a long period of time, including the Halloran family, but many others whose stories will stay with us forever, and we must do better into the future to provide support for those who serve us with great dignity and keep our name as a country so well respected right throughout the world.
Call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer confirm that since the Albanese government was elected, Australian families have suffered a bigger fall in real disposable income per person than any other OECD country?
Order. Order. Just don't need sound effects, but after a question before the Treasurer begins his answer. Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, we understand the pressures on living standards, and that's why we're doing something about it. That's why we're rolling out cost of living support that those opposite don't support, Mr Speaker. That's why we're giving a tax cut to every taxpayer, with those opposite wanted to call an election over, Mr Speaker. It's why we're helping people with their energy bills. It's why we're helping with what people pay at the pharmacy. It's why we're providing rent assistance. It's why we're doing cheaper early childhood education. It's why we're getting wages moving again after a decade of deliberate wage stagnation and wage suppression. So, Mr Speaker, if those opposite really cared about living standards, they'd support our efforts to help people with the cost of living, but they don't. If those opposite cared about living standards, they support our efforts to get wages moving again, but they don't. In fact, they want people working longer for less. We want people earning more and keeping more of what they earn, Mr Speaker. And when we came to office, real wages were falling 3.4%, and now they're growing again. And that's not an accident, that's deliberate. That's because of the policy agenda of this Albanese Labor government, Mr Speaker. And so I welcome, two and a bit years into the parliamentary term, I welcome the appearance of the Shadow Treasurer. That's a good thing for all of us, Mr Speaker. But if he wants to ask about living standards, he should be honest about living standards. And he should acknowledge that every time they put their hands up in this place, it's to make life harder for people when we're trying to make life easier for people. Every time they oppose more housing, every time they oppose energy bill relief, every time they oppose tax cuts, which the Deputy Leader says that they want to unwind.
Order. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy will cease interjecting. So I'd like to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On relevance, it was a very tightly drafted question. Australian families have suffered a bigger fall in real disposable income per person than any other OECD country. If the Treasurer is unable to answer that, he should be direct.
He was asked about can he confirm if families order, and he's just got to make sure his answer is relevant. As I said, he can do some compare and contrast regarding his answer. That can't be the entire answer. He hasn't been doing that. He's been talking about the government's achievements and what he's been doing, and he has 1 minute 20 seconds remaining.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I have acknowledged that people are under extreme pressure. I have acknowledged that. But more than acknowledge that, Mr Speaker, we are doing something about it. And only one side of this parliament cares about the pressures that people are under. And that's why we're rolling out cost of living help. That's why we're cleaning up the mess that they made of the budget. That's why we're investing in housing and skills and energy and a future made in Australia, Mr Speaker, because when we came to office, real wages were falling, inflation had a 6 in front of it and it was rising. Interest rates had already started going up. And what we've done since we've come to office is we've recognised the pressures that people are under. We've recognised that growth in our economy is slow. We've been fighting inflation without ignoring the risks to growth and the pressures that people are under. And if they were serious about it, Mr Speaker, instead of opposing our changes to the tax cuts, instead of opposing our cost of living relief, instead of opposing getting wages moving again, they would have supported it.
The call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering cost of living relief to Australians? What economic approaches has the government ruled out?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Macquarie for her question. And indeed, we know that many Australians are feeling under pressure right now, and easing that cost of living pressure is, of course, our #1 priority. Now, we've kept our focus on delivering relief whilst making sure that we put that downward pressure on inflation at the same time. And since we were last here, just a few weeks ago, we've made medicines more cheaper on the 1st of this month. More of them going into the 60-day list, something that those opposite oppose. We've opened more free Medicare urgent care clinics, once again opposed by those opposite. Energy bill relief has rolled out to more households, and this month over 1 million households will get an increase in rent assistance. And this week we're progressing our plans for super on PPL as well as HEX relief, $3 billion off the HEX bill that Australians have. We're introducing legislation this week to deliver a 15% pay rise for early childhood educators. At the same time, we're ensuring that we keep costs down for families who have their children in childcare. Now, a typical childcare educator will be $155 a week better off when these rises kick in. Now, the opposition, of course, have opposed every cost of living relief we've provided. We know they support lower wages, not higher wages, so we'll wait and see what they have to say about the early educators. They've offered no help, no plans for people doing it tough, just relentless, pointless negativity, including their planned $315 billion in cuts. And I'm asked, have we rejected it? And we sure have. We sure have, Mr Speaker. Now, the Shadow Finance Minister made it clear. She said, I can tell you exactly what we wouldn't have done, that additional $315 billion of spending. Now, what does that mean to people? It means cuts to the pension costing $146 a fortnight, cuts to the single parenting payment, $123 a fortnight, cuts to affordable housing, cuts to Medicare and cheaper medicines, cuts to fee-free tape. She's out there saying we're against that $315 billion on spending. Now, we're cutting the cost of living. The Leader of the Opposition is cutting Medicare pensions and cutting funding for housing. That is their objective. We're fighting inflation. They're fighting amongst themselves.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, why did you make a captain's call to not include LGBTIQA+ people in the census? And do you think the pain caused by this decision underscores the need for an LGBTIQA+ Human Rights Commissioner?
Good question. Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Brisbane for his question. And the 2026 census will include sexual orientation and gender for the first time. We value every Australian. That's who we are as a political party and as a movement. Now, the ABS came to the government with potential changes it planned to trial, including changes it had not recommended for the 2026 census. We paused that process to get it right, and that is precisely what we have done. The government's position follows further engagement with the community and additional discussions with the ABS. We ensured, for example, that only people aged over the age of consent will be asked questions on the new topic, and that people can choose not to answer. Now, regulations to add this new topic will be finalised before the end of the year. This is how you get a common-sense solution, by working with people in order to achieve the objective that we have set. And when I sat in my first term as a member of the House of Representatives, I was the first person to move a private member's bill to give equality for same-sex people in any bill that had been brought before this House. That
But
goes
Mitchell will
back
cease interjecting.
to 1998, and ever since then I have argued the case for equality, regardless of people's sexual orientation, regardless of their identity, regardless of their race, regardless of their faith. What the census is about is recording the state of Australia in 2026, and that's precisely what it will do.
Call to the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's responsible economic management right for the conditions that we confront, and what approaches have been rejected?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member for his question. Since the parliament last sat, we got inflation data which showed that underlying inflation, monthly inflation and non-tradable inflation all continues to moderate. And we also got new numbers last week in the national accounts. And what that showed is that the economy barely grew in the June quarter, 0.2% and 1% through the year. That is the slowest growth in our economy since 2020, Mr Speaker. And the basic story of the national accounts was that weaknesses in the household part of the national accounts and private investment was offset by exports and public final demand. Now, Mr Speaker, the weakness in our economy is the inevitable consequence of three things. First of all, global economic uncertainty. Secondly, persistent price pressures in our economy. And thirdly, the impact of higher interest rates on our economy. Now, the main takeout, Mr Speaker, was that consumption is going backwards in our economy right now, and discretionary spending fell substantially, and household saving is very low. And these are all signs, as we know, or at least this side of the House understands, that people are doing it tough, and that's why our cost of living help is so important, and why it's so important that household incomes grew in the most recent numbers. Now, as I said earlier, Mr Speaker, those opposite don't support cost of living help. And they want higher interest rates. They want a recession for political reasons, and they're very disappointed when they didn't get one, Mr Speaker. And we know this by their reaction right now, and we know this from their reaction last week. We also know that if we had followed their advice, Mr Speaker, we'd be in recession right now, and we're not. This side of the House is fighting inflation without ignoring the risks to growth, and fighting inflation while recognising the pressures that people are under, and we're getting the balance right. Budget repair, cleaning up the mess that we inherited from those opposite, turning big Liberal deficits into big Labor surpluses. Rolling out cost of living help and helping in the fight against inflation. Investing in housing and skills and energy and in a future made in Australia, Mr Speaker. Now, when 2/3 of the OECD has had at least one negative quarter in recent times, we are managing the economy responsibly. We're rolling out that cost of living help, and we're avoiding recession, Mr Speaker. And here there's a very important contrast. The Australian people know that we're helping them with the cost of living, we're fighting inflation, we're cleaning up the budget, and we're investing in the future. But we are in the third year of a three-year parliamentary term, and those opposites still have no credible or costed economic policies to speak of, and they won't come clean on what their $315 billion in cuts will do to push our economy into recession, and what they mean for Medicare or for pensions and payments or for the other services that Australians rely on.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Treasurer. Last week, the Treasurer accused the RBA of smashing the economy. Then, Labor's National President and the Treasurer's mentor, Wayne Swan, said the RBA is, quote, punching itself in the face. Treasurer, why does the Albanese Labor government think it's acceptable to bully the independent RBA in this way when all they're doing is cleaning up Labor's economic mess? Why is the government fighting the Reserve Bank of Australia while Australian families go backwards?
The member for McEwen is warned. I wasn't particularly happy with some of the language in that question. I'm just going to ask the Deputy Leader to state the question again. I don't, just want to make sure it's within the standing orders. That's okay. Well, I do.
The Treasurer. Last week, the Treasurer accused the RBA of smashing the economy. Then, Labor's National President and the Treasurer's mentor, Wayne Swan, said the RBA is, quote, punching itself in the face, unquote. Treasurer, why does the Albanese Labor government think it's acceptable to bully the independent RBA in this way when all they're doing is cleaning up Labor's economic mess? Why is the government fighting the Reserve Bank while Australian families go backwards?
Call to the Treasurer. Yep. The Treasurer has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. A number of elements to the question. First of all, the Governor of the Reserve Bank doesn't consider it the way that the Deputy Leader has said. That's the first point. She made that clear.
Order.
She said it last week, Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer
said it last week, and those opposite.
Yeah, there's far too much noise on my left. I want to hear. The Deputy was given the courtesy. I want to hear the answer. This noise is not going to continue. Otherwise, we won't be here. Treasurer has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Governor made it clear last week in her public comments that she doesn't agree with the assessment put forward by the Deputy Leader. Second point is I'm asked about cleaning up the mess. It's ironic, Mr Speaker, when you consider the mess that we inherited, turning those deficits into surpluses, getting real wages moving again. Inflation is half of what its peak was in the year that we were elected, Mr Speaker. But in terms of the rest of the question, Mr Speaker, it is self-evident. It is a factual point to say that a combination of global economic uncertainty, persistent price pressures and higher interest rates are slowing our economy. And if those opposite don't agree with that, they don't know the first thing about the economy. And I say to the Deputy Leader, don't take your economic advice from the Shadow Treasurer, because everybody who looks at this objectively and factually knows that higher interest rates are slowing our economy. We saw it in the numbers for consumption, discretionary spending, households, dwellings. We saw it in a number of indicators in the national accounts, Mr Speaker. Now, more broadly, when it comes to the fight against inflation, I take responsibility for our part of the fight against inflation. I take responsibilities for surpluses when those opposite only ever delivered deficits. I take responsibility for $80 billion in savings when those opposite had none in their last budget. I take responsibility for banking almost all of the upward revisions to revenue when those opposites spent most of it. I take responsibility for helping inflation moderate further after we inherited much higher inflation from those opposite and it was still going up. I take responsibility for helping the Reserve Bank Governor fight inflation without ignoring the risks to growth. And I won't be taking lectures from those opposite, Mr Speaker, who left us huge deficits and $1 trillion in debt. They left us with inflation with a 6 in front of it and rising. The same people who cheer for higher interest rates and a recession because it serves their political interests. The same people who'd have us in recession right now but with no help for people who are doing it tough and lower wages. The same people who can't tell us where those $315 billion in secret cuts are coming from. The same people who don't have a costed or credible alternative economic policy, Mr Speaker. As the Governor of the Reserve Bank said last week, the government and the Governor are aligned when it comes to the fight against inflation. We've got the same objective, but we've got different responsibilities. I take responsibility for our part in the fight against inflation, and we are making welcome progress since inflation was north of 6% when you were in office.
The call to member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to properly fund public schools and tie that funding to reforms that will help children catch up, keep up and finish school? Thank you.
Give a call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the sensational member for Pearce, for her question from the great state of WA. And last week we signed an agreement with the WA government to fully fund all public schools in Western Australia. And what that means is that Western Australia will become the first state in the country to get public schools to that full funding level that David Gonski said all those years ago. It involves the Commonwealth Government chipping in. It also involves the WA Government chipping in as well. All up, it's worth an extra $1.6 billion for public schools in WA. But it's not a blank cheque. This money will be tied to real and practical reforms to help our children who fall behind to catch up and to keep up and see more children finish high school. And that's important because over the last 7 or 8 years we've seen the number of children in public high schools complete high school go backwards, from about 83% down to 73%. And that's what we've got to fix. It's what we've got to turn around. It's what this funding is all about. Investing in things like a phonics check and a numeracy check in Year 1 to identify children when they're very young who are already falling behind and need extra help, and things like evidence-based teaching and catch-up tutoring to make sure that they get that extra help. Catch-up tutoring involves getting children out of a class of 25 or 30, 4 or 5 days a week for 40 minutes at a time, into a class where there might be 3 or 4 of them and one teacher. And what we know is when you do that in the right way, that a child learns as much in 6 months as they'd otherwise learn in 12 months. In other words, they catch up. In other words, this works. And this investment will also fund extra investments in mental health support. There is an obvious link between health and education. We know children who experience mental health challenges are more likely not to be at school, and that by Year 9, on average, they're about 1.5 to 3 years behind their classmates when it comes to literacy and numeracy. We also need to make sure that this money glows in the dark, and that's what this agreement is all about as well. And in the next few weeks, I'll introduce legislation to make all of this happen, to lock all of this in. And when we do, Mr Speaker, we know what will happen. The Liberal Party will vote against this. London to a brick, they will vote against this. They've already said as much. They've said that they don't think we should be putting extra money into our public schools. Well, Mr Speaker, good luck explaining that to the parents of WA.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Hume.
The question is to the Prime Minister. Despite Labor's pre-election promises, under this government living standards have fallen by nearly 9%. The household savings rate is down 10 percentage points. Personal income tax payments are over 25% higher, and a homeowner with a typical mortgage is over $35,000 worse off. Why won't the Prime Minister admit his government has been a disaster, as more Australian families are working harder and longer but still going backwards?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, the Shadow Treasurer, I thank him for his question. He's exhausted his annual quota of questions to the Treasurer.
2 years worth of questions
in one morning, and now
the Treasurer will cease interjecting.
And now we're back on, Mr. Speaker. Now we're back on. I'm asked about the economy and the comparative performance of the former government compared with our government, and I'm happy to answer. Because inflation peaked under the former government when we came to office. It had a 6 in front of it. Now it's got a 3 in front of it. 6 or 3, which is better? We prefer 3, and that's why we've been delivering, including delivering not one but 2 budget surpluses, something that those opposite, I'm not surprised, can't recognise. But the other thing that we've been doing, whilst we're putting that downward pressure on inflation, while it's continuing to moderate, what we've been doing is making sure that people aren't left behind in that process, that we don't just let it rip with $315 billion of cuts, which is what those opposite are suggesting. So we make no apologies for the fact that we came into this parliament at the beginning of this year and we changed the Liberals' tax cuts for high-income earners into Labor's tax cuts for every working Australian, all 13.6 million of them, because we want to make sure that people do earn more and they keep more of what they earn. We make no apologies either for coming in here and increasing the wages of aged care workers. And later this week we'll have legislation to increase the wage for early educators as well. It's these sort of measures that have seen the gender pay gap reduced to the lowest level in our history, something that we are very proud of. We want to get real wages growing again. They've been up in the last 3 consecutive quarters. we make no apologies either for making sure that our policies have led to the fact that almost 1 million jobs have been created on our watch. But we're not just dealing with the immediate pressures by providing that cost of living support, all of which has been opposed by those opposite. We're also setting up Australia's future through the Future Made in Australia agenda by not being frightened of the future but trying to shape it in the interests of working people, so that we not only have the jobs created through the shift that's happening in the global economy, through things like production tax credits in critical minerals, we're making sure, as well as those measures, that we train people for those jobs through our university support and through fee-free TAFE.
Call to the honourable member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government preparing a capable AUKUS-ready workforce in the West, and how does this differ to other plans?
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, can I thank the member for her question and acknowledge her service? Right now, the USS Hawaii, a Virginia-class submarine, is undergoing intermediate-level maintenance at HMAS Stirling at Rockingham, Western Australia. This is the first time that an American nuclear-powered submarine has undergone maintenance outside of the US or a US base, and it's also the first time that non-US citizens have participated in the maintenance of such a submarine. This is a very significant moment. As Australia evolves its capacity to operate Virginia-class submarines and indeed our future submarines from HMAS Stirling, as we establish the Submarine Rotational Force West, a critical element of this will be building our ability to engage in the maintenance of these submarines in increasing complexity. And that journey really starts with the USS Hawaii. It really is the biggest AUKUS moment this year. And so on Monday, the Prime Minister and I were at HMAS Stirling and we met American and Australian naval personnel working together on this project. We also met a number of employees of ASC, because this is a great opportunity for West Australian defence industry. In time, we will see thousands of jobs created in Western Australia's naval industry, and it's why the government announced that we will be funding an additional 200 entry-level positions over the next 2 years at ASC, graduates, trainees and apprentices, so that ASC can have the skilled workforce that it needs, but so at the same time this great opportunity can be presented to young Western Australians. Jobs for subs. Mr Speaker, AUKUS is happening. Real jobs are now being created. Real progress is now being made. Real capability is now being built. And this is such a contrast to the thought bubble that we inherited from those opposite. Because when the Liberals were in government, they opened up a 10-year submarine capability gap, and, Mr Speaker, right now that gap is being closed as we speak at HMAS Stirling, because while the Liberals were all about defence hoopla, the Albanese Labor government is all about real defence action.
The member for Canning.
Just on indulgence, Speaker. No.
No. That's not how indulgence works. Give the call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Last week's national accounts revealed the true impact of Labor's economic failures. KPMG Chief Economist Dr Brendan Rinn says the government, quote, has its foot on the accelerator, the Reserve Bank's foot is on the brake, it's stalling the economy. Why is the government fighting the Reserve Bank and leaving Australian families going backwards?
Give a call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. When it comes to government spending, We have turned two very big Liberal deficits into two big Labor surpluses, and the Governor of the Reserve Bank has made it clear that those two surpluses are helping in the fight against inflation. We have found almost $80 billion in savings, and those opposite found none in their last budget, Mr Speaker. We've banked almost all of the upward revision to revenue in our budgets. Those opposite used to spend most of the upward revisions to revenue in the budgets, Mr Speaker. So we've been managing the budget in a very responsible way, getting the budget in much better nick, cleaning up the mess that we inherited from those opposite at the same time as we roll out cost of living relief and fight inflation and invest in a future made in Australia and in the future of our economy, Mr Speaker. Now, I'm asked about the government's position and the Reserve Bank's position. And honourable members and the public beyond should be aware that the Governor of the Reserve Bank has itself said that we are completely aligned when it comes to the focus on inflation and being concerned about maintaining the gains in the labour market. Her quote, the Governor's quote on the 16th of August, quote, "We are completely aligned on this," Mr Speaker. Governor Bullock also said on the 5th of June, "I think fiscal policy has been running a surplus for the last couple of years, so I'd say that has been helping the homegrown inflation situation, if anything, in that circumstance," Mr Speaker.
Member for Hume, no, the member for Hume is just going to cease interjecting. He's had a good go right throughout question time. I'm sure he wishes to stay, so he can help me stay. Well, help himself as well. So the Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, another very similar point that Governor Bullock has made, and I'm surprised, given she said it twice, that the Shadow Treasurer didn't notice it. On the 16th of August, Governor Bullock said, "Public demand is not, as I said, the main game here. It's not the thing that we're focusing on." On the 5th of September, she said, "Government spending is not actually the main game here," Mr Speaker. So if they don't want to take my word for it, take the word of the Governor of the Reserve Bank. The Governor of the Reserve Bank has made it very clear that we are aligned when it comes to the fight against inflation. It's one of the reasons why we've got inflation down from something that had a 6 in front of it when they were in office to a 3 in front of it right now. We know that these price pressures are more persistent than we would like, and that's why it requires ongoing effort. Our primary focus is the fight against inflation, as is the Reserve Bank's. We know that we need to do that without ignoring the risks to growth and the pressures that people are already under, Mr Speaker. Now, if those opposite were in office, we'd be in recession right now. They'd be running huge deficits rather than a couple of big surpluses, and that would have implications, Mr Speaker. We're managing the budget responsibly. It's the third year of a 3-year parliamentary term, and they don't have any policies.
Call to the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How is the Albanese Labor government backing Australian businesses to secure a future made in Australia, and what approaches has the government rejected?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Macon. He knows that great Aussie ideas lead to great products and great, secure, well-paying jobs. And we know the right support at the right time for emerging Australian manufacturers is crucial to securing those jobs. And our $400 million industry growth program is setting us up for a future made in Australia by doing exactly just that. Like the $3.1 million that the IGP is providing for Seed Terminator, a family business in Adelaide that is looking to expand its exports. The brainchild of a South Australian engineer, Nick Berry, Seed Terminator's harvester attachment smashes 99% of weed seeds, chemical-free, dramatically increasing crop efficiency. And then there's the $4.3 million the IGP is providing in support to Cauldron Molecules in the electorate of Calare to scale up their world-leading hyper-fermentation demonstration facility to full industrial production. And as co-founder Michelle Stansfield says, critical support helps position Australia as a global leader in biomanufacturing, tapping into a $700 billion global market, backing Aussie know-how to make more things here, create more secure, well-paid regional jobs. That's our approach. But, Mr Speaker, I'm asked if there are any
approaches that have been rejected, and the coalition's offered those approaches in spades, and they're all awful. Their approach, weighed down by a shameful legacy, driving out manufacturers and jobs in government and then refusing to back anything to strengthen manufacturers while in opposition. And in terms of the opposition, in their frenzied rush to talk down manufacturing, the mouths are working, not so much the brains. A few examples from our Future Made in Australia bill and the debate around it. The member for Sturt declares, "We are not the party of picking winners," and yet he was in the government that invested billions to bring Moderna and mRNA manufacturing to Australia. The member for Groom asked, "Do we choose to be directed more firmly by the government, or do we allow the invisible hand to make its way?" The same invisible hand that brick by brick will magically build the nuclear power plants, funded entirely by taxpayer dollars. And the member for Mitchell, fresh from dusting a Milton Friedman statue, leave off his philosophical manner to warn that Milton Friedman spoke about the misallocation of government capital and the increase in government spending. Perhaps penned that dire warning about misallocating government capital in a commuter car park that was built nowhere near a train station. Great work, that. So strong manufacturing delivers a strong economy. Yes, a coalition might not believe it. We do, and we will fight for it.
The call to the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. With our economy recently recording the weakest annual financial year growth in years, small to medium-sized family-owned businesses are struggling. Yet these business owners from North Sydney and beyond, and tax experts, have raised serious concerns with me about the ATO's aggressive debt enforcement action increasingly targeting them. Treasurer, will your government issue guidance or a mandate to the ATO to ensure debt collection processes targeting small to medium-sized businesses are conducted in a way that recognises the tough economic times?
Call to the Treasurer.
Yes. Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and to the member for North Sydney for raising the genuine concerns that I know that she has about the ATO's debt collection activities. And I also wanted to acknowledge the member for Warringah, who raises these matters from time to time with me as well. This is something that I speak with the Tax Commissioner about from time to time, because I do understand that in the context of an economy where growth is slow and subdued, where consumption is weak, particularly when it comes to discretionary spending, I do know that a lot of small businesses, like a lot of Australians, are doing it tough. And so we do need to make sure that when the ATO does its important work, which is recovering tax debts, so that we make sure that there's a level playing field between the people who do their best to keep up to date and those who are unable to. We do need to make sure that there's an even playing field. But whenever these activities are undertaken, we need to make sure that they're undertaken in the most sensitive and understanding way that they can be. My advice to small businesses who are in the situation that you described, the member for North Sydney describes, I'd encourage them to engage as early as possible with the ATO to come to the arrangements that they need in order to keep doing the really important work that they do in our economy. From our point of view, we'll continue doing what we can to support small business, whether it's a bit of help with energy bills, whether it's the tax breaks and in other ways. We're big supporters of small business. We know it's a tough time for them, and we want the ATO to recognise that as well.
Call to the honourable member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources and Northern Australia. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting a strong resource sector to drive a future made in Australia and create secure jobs? What approaches to our resource sector has the government ruled out?
Call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the wonderful member for Swan for her fine question. And especially in Minerals Week, we're here in Canberra. We welcome those from the industry to come here together to talk about the nation-building contribution of the resources sector, which is the engine room of Australia's economy. It is the source of well-paid jobs and billions of dollars of investment from right around the world, and it will help drive our future made in Australia to capitalise on the world's transition to net zero. And the May budget, this government's budget in May, put the resources industry at the heart of government policy making. We have committed to $17 billion for a production tax incentive for critical minerals to encourage onshore processing, and $3.4 billion to the Resourcing Australia's Prosperity Program so that Geoscience Australia can identify deposits of critical minerals and map our future. It was the most significant federal budget for the resources sector in a generation because we support the resources sector through industry-backed policy, not by simply attending dinners and parties in the Pilbara. There have been alternative approaches and we have rejected them. For instance, we won't measure our support for the industry by the number of resources ministers we have at any one time. We also won't kick the resources portfolio around like a political football, kicking it out of the cabinet room because of a Nationals leadership squabble. What they are doing, Mr Speaker, is standing in the way of reduction tax incentive and doing communities out of jobs and investments. As well as the production tax credit, this government supports the resources sector through the NAIF and the Critical Minerals Facility. We have financed 7 important resources projects under the NAIF and more under the CMF. The 7 resources projects will create more than 7,000 jobs in resources, which is more than double what the opposition managed to do with the NAIF when they were in government. And the total value of those 7 resources projects is $13 billion, which is more than quadruple the support those opposite ever provided to the sector via the NAIF. What those opposite are doing is worse than nothing. Worse than nothing, Mr Speaker. By standing in the way of production tax credits, they are standing in the way of jobs in their communities. It beggars belief that those opposite have absolutely no problem with government loans that necessarily assume a higher risk because of their challenges, but they oppose industry-led policy that is no risk because it provides investment incentives and is paid out only on success. These economic dunderheads on the other side of the House, they want to break up Qantas and Jetstar, they want to boycott Woolies, they want government-owned and run nuclear power plants, but they won't back industry-led to production tax credits for a critical minerals processing sector.
Before I call the Leader of the Nationals, I inform the House that present in the gallery today is a delegation of senior officials from the Federal National Council of the United Arab Emirates, led by the Secretary-General, His Excellency Dr Omar Al-Nawawi, as part of a study visit. On behalf of all members, welcome to question time. Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment. Regis Resources has confirmed the Blaney gold mine is no longer viable following the Minister's decision to block a critical part of the project against the advice of the legislative authority, the local Aboriginal Land Council. Why won't the Minister release the statement of reasons for her decision that has jeopardised a $1 billion investment, some 800 jobs, and create sovereign risks which will see companies withdraw investment from Australia?
Call to the Minister for the Environment and Minister for Water.
Thanks so much, and I want to thank the Leader of the Nationals for his question. It's interesting that he suggested that the company doesn't believe that the project is viable because the chairman has just bought 15,000 extra shares, and one of the other directors has just bought another more than 10,000 extra shares with his wife. The CEO and his wife, through Deck Chair Trust, have bought more than 10,000 extra shares. But just to be very clear here, I have not blocked the gold mine. What I've said is, of this 2,500 hectare site, 400 hectares ought to be protected. And I've done it on the basis of advice from the same group of traditional owners as the former Minister for the Environment, the now Deputy Leader of the Opposition. And I want to table the picture of the former Minister meeting with the same group of traditional owners. I made the same type of decision.
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is going to pause so I can hear from the Leader of the Nationals.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. This was to a specific project, not the one the minister is talking about. There was no ask for compare and contrast. Totally different reasonings around different projects and different cultural. So how can the minister be relevant?
In the question, she was asked about the process that she undertook and included, I heard, the traditional owners. So, order. And she's giving the reasons and talking about the project. So she is being directly She's being directly relevant, and I'm just going to invite her now to return to the question. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, same principle. Help me, help you. Okay. I'm trying to make sure the minister is being directly relevant because the leader's taken a question, and I'm just going to ask her to return to the question.
It is the same group of traditional owners, and I'm going to table the map that shows that the two projects are about 50 kilometres apart, about half an hour's drive. It's also the same type of decision. I made a declaration under the Act. I made a declaration under the Act in the same way that the previous minister did. That's a Section 10 declaration. I'll table that. I've made the decision for the same reasons as the minister, the former minister, made.
Is going to cease interjecting.
And I'll read to you from her press release. The decision acknowledges the cultural significance that this area has for the Wiradjuri people in contributing to local Aboriginal narratives, songlines, ceremonies and cultural heritage. It's the same reasons. Mr Speaker, I was asked about the reasoning, and I am explaining the reasoning. And just the fact that you don't like it, and I've said to the company that I will provide them with the statement of reasons.
No, we're going to deal with this. The minister's going to pause. The Leader of the National simply talking over the minister throughout the remainder of the answer. He's now warned. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is also warned. The minister is not giving the answer you'd like. I get that. But she's being directly relevant to the question, talking about the reasons, talking about the issues. So we're not going to have any more interjections. The minister has the call.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Nationals have asked about the statement of reasons. I've made it clear to the company that they'll get a statement of reasons. But just as the previous Environment Minister made this decision for the same reasons, based on advice from the same group, for an area not 50 kilometres away, her decision was also not universally popular. And in fact, when she made her decision, there was an ABC News article which says, from the Mayor, from my point of view, and I quote, "She got it wrong. We've done all the homework we could. We've got all the advice, and I'm disappointed she didn't take this on notice." I table that media report from the Mayor of the time. Not everyone was happy with the reasons that were provided. And here is an article from the Western Advocate that also complained about
the minister's
her
time
reasons.
has concluded. Give the call to the member for Chisholm.
Thanks so much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will the outcomes of last week's National Cabinet on gender-based violence deliver on the priorities in the National Plan to end violence against women and children?
The call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Chisholm for her question. Of course, family, domestic and sexual violence destroys lives, and it must end. Since the day we were elected, our government has made the safety of women and children experiencing family, domestic and sexual violence a national priority. Our government, along with states and territories, are united in our efforts under the National Plan to end violence against women and children. The National Plan is a roadmap for change and was developed in partnership with victim survivors and outlines our shared goals of ending violence against women and children in a generation. Now, our government has already invested more than $3.4 billion into women's safety, and this investment is guided by our national plan. Now, last Friday, as part of this government's concerted effort, the Prime Minister convened all states and territories for the second dedicated National Cabinet meeting on gender-based violence. The Commonwealth, along with all states and territories, confirmed further action to tackling family, domestic and sexual violence. Now, part of this extra effort was announced by the Albanese Labor government of an extra $4.4 billion in investment to fund action. As part of ensuring support for victim survivors, frontline legal services will benefit from the largest injection of funding to legal assistance sector in the last 20 years. And our government will also provide much-needed support for family, domestic and sexual violence frontline services through a 5-year national partnership agreement with funding to be matched by states and territories. This will provide long-term funding certainty and focus on specialised services for women, services to support children exposed to family, domestic and sexual violence, and working with men, including men's behaviour change programs. In addition, the Albanese Labor government is providing $80 million to expand existing programs that support children and young people to address the impact of violence on children's development and well-being. Our government also will lead the development of a national minimum standards for men's behaviour change programs to ensure that these programs make a real difference. And along with that, we will develop a new best practice family and domestic violence risk assessment principles and framework. Of course, the Attorney-General will also be leading work with jurisdictions to improve information sharing and policing response for high-risk perpetrators. Mr Speaker, our government has and will continue substantial action under our national plan to end violence against women and children. We all have a role to play to end violence in one generation, and our government will work with everyone, governments, business, communities and individuals to achieve this goal.
The call, General Member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. The Woodside Barracks, established in 1927, is historically, militarily and economically important for my Mayo community. The base also hosts over 100 Army and Air Force cadets, regional young people, many of whom are interested in a military career. Minister, will the Woodside Barracks remain an operational base, and will you rule out selling off the land as currently speculated?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank the member for her question. As the member would be aware, the government has undertaken a review into the defence estate to ensure that the defence estate is the appropriate platform that it should be for the defence force that we need and for the defence force to achieve the strategic aims that we need it to achieve in what is a very difficult world. I'm not going to go into the specifics of any defence site and walk down the path of that before the government releases its response to the estate review. We are currently in the process of working that response through. We've received the report from those who have undertaken it. We need to be ensuring that all the implications in relation to personnel associated with the thorough review of our defence estate are completely worked through, and that will take some months to do that. It is not our intention to respond to the review until sometime next year because of the work that is involved in relation to that. Having said that, I acknowledge what the member has said about the Woodside Barracks and its significance. Of course, for pretty well every member of this place, they will have a part of the defence estate within their electorate. Defence is one of, if not the biggest landowner in the country, and so this is an important process to go through. But as I say, the government is working this through in detail, and I'm very happy to brief the member at greater detail at a later stage.
The call to the member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. How will the measures announced last Friday help end the crisis in legal assistance in this country and enable more women to get the help they need to safely leave a violent relationship?
Call to the Attorney-General.
I thank the member for Wills for his question. The Prime Minister's announcement following National Cabinet on Friday was very significant, demonstrating the commitment of the Albanese Labor government to ending violence against women and children in a generation. As the Prime Minister said on Friday, the $4.7 billion package includes $3.9 billion for the 5-year National Access to Justice Partnership, and that includes an $800 million increase on current funding levels for the legal assistance sector, plus, and this is very significant, a commitment to ongoing funding. Every part of the legal assistance sector will benefit from this $800 million boost, which will be shared between community legal centres, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal services, women's legal services, legal aid commissions and family violence prevention legal services. It's the biggest single investment by the Commonwealth in the legal assistance sector ever. This package will provide pay parity for the community legal centre sector so that lawyers and other workers in community legal centres, in Aboriginal legal services, in women's legal services and FVPLSs, themselves mostly women, because most of the workers in this sector are women, will no longer have to accept being paid up to 30% less than their counterparts in legal aid commissions. Legal assistance providers, such as the Northern Community Legal Centre, which serves the electorate of Wills, are on the front line of the fight to end gender-based violence. But community legal centres, including women's legal centres, are currently turning away up to 1,000 people per day. This investment in legal assistance will ensure that those services can help more Australians. This investment in legal assistance services will ensure that these services can help more women, including First Nations women, safely leave and recover from violent relationships. By providing ongoing funding to the sector, we help end the destructive uncertainty created by the former government. Now legal services can hire new staff, they can take up new premises, they can plan with confidence for the future. The Liberals oversaw a decade of chronic underfunding.
Order.
I know you don't like it, but you'd better listen.
The Attorney-General will pause. That is not an invitation to order. The manager has the right to ask a point of order.
It was, in fact, a commendably tightly drafted question. There was no reference to alternative approaches. The Attorney-General, of all people, should be able to follow the standing orders and control his temper.
Yeah.
You should control your temper.
No. The Attorney-General's going to pause. Just going to take his seat for a moment. The Attorney-General was not asked about alternative approaches in the question. I'm going to ask him to conclude his answer about government policy, or he will resume his seat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Only a Labor government is genuinely committed to the legal assistance sector and the essential work that they do to keep women safe.
Order. The member for Riverina will cease interjecting. Order. No, the member for Riverina, I can appreciate, has passionate views, but he'll just remain silent. Member for Flinders has
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why does the Treasurer blame everyone and everything for his failings, from the former government, COVID, war in Ukraine, global economy, financial instability and the RBA Governor herself, Interest rates have come down in the UK, Canada and New Zealand, so why won't the Treasurer take responsibility for the weakest GDP growth outside the pandemic since Paul Keating's 1990s recession?
Order. The order was a broad question. The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, they couldn't even stick with the Shadow Treasurer for one full question time. They had to go up the back. Mr Speaker.
Order. Order. Members on my left. The member for Barker. Order. The Leader of the Opposition. Just going to... No, the member for Fadden will leave the chamber under 94A. We're just going to take the temperature down. The Treasurer has the call.
Well, a couple of things about that, Mr Speaker. First of all, the honourable member made the point about interest rates in other countries. A number of the other countries that those opposite cite have got higher unemployment than us, and they've got higher interest rates than us, and their inflation peaked higher and earlier than us. And so if they want to make comparisons with other countries, make the full comparison. You know, do they want the much higher unemployment that we see in some of these countries that they cite, Canada and New Zealand and the like? And so they should be upfront about that when they ask these questions with international comparisons. Now, we know that they desperately want higher interest rates to serve their political purposes. We know that they desperately want a recession in this country to serve their political purposes. We know they won't come clean on the impact of their $315 billion in cuts, Mr Speaker. Now, I'm asked about taking responsibility. And as I said a moment ago to the Shadow Treasurer before he was benched again, I take responsibility for our part in the fight against inflation. And in doing so, I take responsibility of working with all these colleagues to deliver two surpluses that those opposite were incapable of delivering, Mr Speaker. I take responsibility for $80 billion in savings which those opposite had $0 in savings in their last budget. I take responsibility for banking almost all the upward revisions to revenue when those opposite used to fritter those upward revisions away. I take responsibility for the fact that the day that we arrived in office, inflation was 6.1%. Now it's got a 3 in front of it, Mr Speaker. I take responsibility for maintaining this primary focus on the fight against inflation at the same time as we recognise, alone in this place, that people are already under pressure and growth in the economy is already soft and subdued, Mr Speaker. And I say once again that when it comes to responsible economic management, I will not be taking lectures from those opposite who left us huge deficits. They left us $1 trillion in Liberal debt, a budget full of waste and rorts and mismanagement. The same people who cheer for higher interest rates, the same people who want inflation to go up, the same people who'd have us in recession right now if we had followed their advice, Mr Speaker. Their time would be better spent coming clean to the Australian people about what their $315 billion in secret cuts means for Medicare and pensions and for the economy.
Call to the honourable member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How is the Albanese Labor government reforming the aviation sector to deliver better access, reliability and competition? What approaches has the government ruled out?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Bendigo for the question and her tireless championing of regional aviation, particularly the investment in Bendigo Airport. Now, of course, this government is implementing the most significant reforms to Australian aviation in a decade. And over recent years, the performance of our aviation sector hasn't been good enough. Poor passenger services, customers being left waiting for refunds, travellers with a disability facing shameful treatment, and our government saw the need to act, and we are acting. Through the Aviation White Paper, along with our major reforms to Sydney Airport, we're increasing consumer protections through the creation of the first ombudsperson. We're to cover the sector. We're creating a Charter of Consumer Rights. We're increasing transparency on airline performance, and we're increasing access to Sydney Airport to boost competition. And, of course, we're building Western Sydney International Airport. Choice has said that they strongly welcome the reforms. Tourism and Transport Forum called our reforms significant steps forward towards creating a stronger aviation sector, and the Airports Association said our reforms put passengers first, and the ASU said this is our chance to make Australian airlines the envy of the world. Now, I'm asked what approaches has the government rejected. Now, what we have rejected, frankly, is the lazy and tired approach that those opposite took when they were in government. When they were in government, they did absolutely nothing to reform aviation. They didn't act on consumer rights, didn't act on disability rights, and they didn't act on competition. Now, of course, we all woke up this morning to see the shadow transport spokesperson having a bit of a big idea. She's decided that she wants to divestiture of Jetstar, breaking up aviation, seeing Jetstar go the way of Tiger Air. This significant policy, you would think any serious political party would have thought deeply about such a significant policy. But this thought bubble didn't last the light of day. While Australians were still having breakfast, the member for New England and Senator Hume refused to back it in, quite rightly, and just after breakfast, the Leader of the Nationals quite rightly killed it dead forever. That's it. He not only confirmed that it hadn't been to shadow cabinet, he said, and I quote, "Well, it's not coalition policy because we haven't got the evidence." By lunchtime, not even Senator McKenzie backed Senator McKenzie, forced to front a press conference walking back her comments. Another evidence-free and damaging thought bubble from people who've proved once again why they can't be trusted with managing Australia's economy. The only divestment the Liberal Party should have a good look at and now consider is divesting themselves of this loose National Party.
Call to the Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Move to papers. I present the annual report of the Australian National Audit Office for 2023 to 2000.